Right, let's start. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. A very warm welcome on behalf of our hosts to Enhancing Global Governance to Address the Climate Crisis. This session is sponsored by the Integrity Initiatives International, by the Climate Governance Commission of the Global Challenges Foundation, in partnership with Stimson Center, the Global Governance Forum, and the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. I'm Diana Eggleston. I'm the Business Advisor, Impact Economy and NGOs at the Hague Business Agency. And it's my privilege and my pleasure to moderate this evening's discussion. Now, this ICC Forum's ambition is to make climate action everyone's business. And it states that it's no longer about the what, but the how. Given the gravity of the climate crisis, stronger global climate governance is urgently needed. Tonight, we'll hear why significant improvement of legal accountability at the global level is therefore imperative. This would support and accelerate the implementation of a range of policies, principles, and obligations, many of which are actually already widely accepted in numerous international environmental treaties. The Climate Governance Commission recently launched its new interim report, Governing Our Climate Future, which explores global governance proposals to address the climate crisis. Now, what I'm really excited about is that all of this evening's panelists have contributed to this report, and they will share their proposals with you in this session. We have a unique opportunity to engage with them all in one place. We'll have our panelists who are joining us from Boston, from Vermont, from Porto. We have even Maud, who's in the Highlands of Scotland, and Maja and Jule, who are actually in Glasgow this evening. But of course, we're grateful to you, our online audience, and we want to also include you in the dialogue. So there's a poll. If you click on the poll tab, and we're really curious who we're connecting in this event, where you're from. Now we will start with Maja Groff, who will present Governing Our Climate Future and proposals to possible reforms to the UN Charter. Next, we'll hear from Jule Schnakenberg about seeking an advisory opinion on climate change from the International Court of Justice here in The Hague. Then we'll move on to the proposal to establish two new courts: an International Court for the Environment, presented by Stephen Hockman, and an International Anti-Corruption Court, presented by Judge Mark Wolf. Afterwards, Maud Sarliev will talk about ecocide and climate litigation, and Paulo Magalhães will conclude with a proposal for a new legal status for the global ecological commons. We'll close with a final interactive round where all speakers can reflect on the session and also engage with you. I'm very much looking forward to the dialogue, and I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Maja Groff. Maja is an international lawyer based in The Hague. She's the convener of the Climate Governance Commission, who recently launched its interim report, Governing Our Climate Future, which includes summaries of all the proposals we'll discuss today. Maja is also the co-author of the book, Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century, with Augusto López Claros, who's the chair of the Global Governance Forum, and Arthur Dahl, president of the International Environment Forum. Together, they are co-winners of a Global Challenges Foundation 2018 New Shape Prize. Now, Maja, the UN Charter has remained largely frozen since it was adopted in 1945. In your book and the Climate Governance Commission's report, you state that the imperative of global environmental governance did not exist back then. So what kind of challenges does this pose, Maja, for our collective response to the climate crisis? And how do you think the UN Charter could be reformed to make it more equal to the crisis? Maja, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Diana, and good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be with you. I will just share my screen quickly so I can share a PowerPoint. Wonderful. Hopefully everybody sees that now. Okay. So as Diana was mentioning, all of the wonderful speakers we will hear from today have contributed a proposal or initiative to this report governing our climate future. And Diana raised the issue also of the UN Charter, which has not been reformed by since 1945, that colleagues and I have been working on in terms of these very macro proposals about how we might update it to make it equal to 21st century challenges, including the climate challenge and related ecological global challenges. So first, before I talk a little bit about potential perspectives on UN Charter reform, I'll just give you a tiny bit of background and sort of an overview perspective on this interim report of the Climate Governance Commission governing our climate future, which was released in earlier October. So this is the link where you can find the report. Some of the authors are various key partners. And just to note that we have about 30 different contributing authors from around the world with various perspectives on this global climate governance challenge at this crucial time in human history. So we're really trying to build a community of practice and establish networks around the world. So anyone watching is also very welcome to become part of this growing network. So the Climate Governance Commission was established by the Global Challenges Foundation to really look at this global governance lens at the global architecture, really the heavy architecture, our international legal institutions, the UN Charter, other dimensions in our current international system, but also look practically, how do we need to improve our global governance architecture to diffuse and implement vital policies to meet the climate challenge, to implement known solutions to the climate challenge. So we all know, according to science reports of the IPCC, that our GHG emissions must go down dramatically now this century, and to hit net zero by 2050. We have urgent challenges, and we need to make this transformation as quickly as possible. So the Climate Commission, in its dialogue with a wide range of international experts, practitioners, identified three key gaps in confronting the climate challenge, climate action gaps. First, the solution action gap. We know that there are existing technological, economic, and social solutions to the climate crisis, but they are simply not being implemented at the scale and with the pace needed. Second, we need policies that facilitate and help to implement these solutions. And again, the policies are not being implemented around the world at the speed and scale that we need to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So finally, this brings us to the climate governance gap, particularly at the global level. We need stronger international law, stronger institutions. We need a range of levers to support the Paris Agreement and the key goals that are enshrined in the Paris Agreement to keep humanity on a safe path as we go forward into this very quite risky and frightening time, where we do not know all of the knock-on effects of the very rapidly increasing changing climate. And just to mention this partnership with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, which this initiative has mapped out indeed all of these existing technological, economic solutions across sectors that would keep our global temperature limitation within the 1.5 centigrade limitation target. So again, we know the pathways in terms of what we must implement, but we simply are not scaling up this action, scaling up this policies. And we feel that part of this problem, one bottleneck, large bottleneck, is still undeveloped global governance mechanisms and institutions, which we'll hear various perspectives on from our colleagues today. So just I'll let everyone go and look and dig into the report in terms of key vital policies that a sub-report has identified that are absolutely fundamental to drive the economic transformation and the necessary action. For example, prices on carbon, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, etc. So there's a very interesting paper on key vital policies that we need to implement, not just at the national level, but we need to find a way to scale them up and diffuse them globally in a systematic fashion as soon as possible. Also, the exponential roadmap developed this notion of exponential policy, that these climate policies, because they must drive systemic change across our economies, across our societies, we have to think of their sort of potential in terms of if they're innovative solutions, they need to be nurtured by certain policies when they're just getting going. And then when they're scaled up to a certain point, they might need a certain other policy tweaking and interventions so that these new technologies, new solutions really do diffuse throughout our various systems and do drive this holistic economic systemic transformation that we need. And I'll let you dig into the report on these issues in terms of exponential policy and this concept. So moving now to the global governance proposals, which we'll hear about today. In the report, in this community of practice we've gathered, we gathered no less than 23 proposals for global governance reforms and perspectives to really enable this rapid transition to meet the Paris Agreement goals urgently. And we have a set of proposals around global economic and development dimension, then strengthen international law, which we'll hear about today primarily, also reforming existing international institutions and sort of bottom-up pathways of working within existing international architecture to accelerate action. So global economic and development perspectives, there's a range of different proposals. I don't have time to go into them, but just to give you an example, Augusto Lopez Claros has done a paper on raising, new, very large levels of international finance to really meet the quantum of the global mitigation and adaptation climate challenges, going beyond the 100 billion that even that has been difficult to reach. So we really need bold new economic policies. Now, today you'll hear from many of these strengthened international law proposals, so I won't dwell on those. I will just mention, as Diana mentioned, in the category of reformed and new institutions, the work that Arthur Dahl, Augusto Lopez Claros, and I have done on really a comprehensive reform of the UN Charter, which was supposed to be done within 10 years of the adoption of in 1945 of the current UN Charter. And we suggest in our book, and the book link is open source, open access. You can download it for free on the Cambridge University Press website. But we suggest a set of comprehensive reforms where the UN Charter can be made more fit for purpose for the climate challenge, for biodiversity challenges, and other intersecting international risks. We talk about updated legislative capacity for the UN, updated executive and judicial capacity of the United Nations. So we can perhaps talk about that more later, or please feel very invited to dig into this Cambridge University Press book later. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say. We have a few other proposals about reforming current institutions like the UNFCCC, also new institutions like a global environment agency, and also potentially a global emergency platform that could be set up really in the near term to address global intersecting risks. And finally, bottom-up pathways, as I mentioned, like an international global climate policy clearinghouse. So I think I will end there, but just to let you know that the report is there, that there are people who are thinking in this macro global governance way, and there are a lot of brilliant proposals across a whole range of areas to give hope really to the international community and the public who is so concerned about the climate challenge, how we can strengthen our collective mechanisms to really ramp up our action and ramp up addressing these vital challenges at the moment. So I shall stop there, Diana. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maja. So much rich content and food for thought in there. To our audience, the link to the report has been posted in the chat for you, and we will, of course, continue posting relevant links. Also, I know we're all going to be learning so much this evening, but that there will be also lots of questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and make sure that you select the session tab, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So not the whole event, but the session, and there's a Q&A tab. We will collect your questions. But now I want to introduce Jule Schnakenberg, because of course, in addition to considering new and existing international legal institutions, in addition to all these concepts about international law, we need to know and consider how new and existing international legal institutions can help address the climate crisis. Jule Schnakenberg is a coordinator of the youth-led World's Youth for Climate Justice. The WYCJ seeks an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice to clarify the obligations of states to protect the rights of current and future generations from the adverse effects of climate change. Now, Jule, the South Pacific Ocean nation Vanuatu recently announced that it would seek an ICJ advisory opinion on climate change and human rights. What do you think needs to happen for the campaign led by WYCJ to be successful? And how would such an advisory opinion lead to more ambitious climate action? Jule, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introductory words and for allowing us to be here. It's always great to see that a report can come to life and there are actually people behind all these great ideas. Very honored that our ideas was considered one of the important ones to include in the report, but also more broadly, I think in the movement, hopefully, or in the longer term conversation on this. And trying to find much needed responses and hope. I really appreciate that you said the word Maja. I think that's really what fuels us and what we're hoping to get out of the advisory opinion also, to give people hope again. I'm calling in from Glasgow, so we've been doing some long days of climate change negotiations already, or the other people have. So I think the need for an advisory opinion has become very clear again to me every day. So we are approaching an existing court. Some people are saying, oh, this is a big court, they're quite conservative, maybe we should do some more ambitious litigation. But the advantage of an advisory opinion is that it really is it's applicable to all UN member states. So this isn't a contentious case between just two states, but whatever the ICJ will say in the end applies to all member states. So we believe this is more of a facilitative process rather than calling out individual states. But it will clarify, it will bring much needed legal clarity in international law, and we really want to bring environmental law, climate change law, and human rights law together. So some areas of law that have been very separate in the past, bringing them together and really highlighting the point that states actually have human rights obligations in the context of climate change and responding to that. And the advisory opinion is of course not binding. If you're a lawyer listening to this, you will definitely know this. So there's no enforcement mechanism necessarily to come and make sure that states follow whatever the advisory opinion is going to be or say. I should say maybe an advisory opinion is an answer to a legal question. So the UN General Assembly, which is the route that Vanuatu is pursuing, the UN General Assembly will ask a question to the court, and the court will answer that question. And whatever that answer is going to be will clarify, but also clarify what the existing law is, but also provide guidance to national courts. So not in all countries climate litigation is possible, as we've seen it maybe in the Netherlands or recently in Germany. But it will allow those courts to make similar rulings or judgments, even if national domestic legislation, climate change legislation doesn't lend itself to that easily. We believe that it can send a very strong signal also, and hopefully increase and encourage more ambitious action, and facilitate international collaboration, and not just around mitigation, which has been a big topic historically, but really also about adaptation, loss and damage, what comes after just trying to reduce emissions, and how we're getting there. So as Diana introduced me, I think I'm the youngest person here tonight, and the youth rep. I'm very grateful for that. So there's a global youth network that we're building, that we're growing, to make sure that we're growing enough international support for the advisory opinion. So it'll be Vanuatu taking this to the UN General Assembly, but they need a simple majority of UN member states. So that will be 97 states if all states were present and voting. And yeah, we are trying to get enough young people around the world to support this, to lobby their individual governments to support Vanuatu's initiative once it does reach New York. So that's a busy job, a big job, a big task ahead of us. We think it can be very powerful to include that youth narrative and that civil society approach to this initiative. And we've spoken to Maja about this before, and I think it can also send a very powerful signal that this is the people entering the courtroom in a court that has been very exclusive and not really accessible, I think, to people. They don't really know what happens inside or who even sits inside, how any decisions are being made. So we're hoping that in this process we can also make the advisory opinion, make the whole court more accessible, I think, to young people, and do a lot of that translation and bridging work also. Maybe I'll leave it here, but if there are any questions, I think I'd like to maybe reiterate that when you said in the beginning, climate action is everyone's business. I think we have a really, really big challenge ahead of us, but we can only do this with all of your support. So this is a very explicit, warm invitation to join us on this ride, on this journey in whatever capacity you can. Thank you again. I'm very happy to answer any questions via email also, or via the chat, or in any other way you can find and reach out to us. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Jule. Thank you so much. And actually, to share with everyone who is watching, Jule, you are actually going to join the government of Vanuatu in 5 minutes or so before a meeting. And what's that all about? Are you going to see how they go about it so that you can learn also for your campaign, or is it to help them with their campaign? Can you share with us? That's the question.
I was going to say, maybe there are some things I'm not allowed to share, but I think we are trying to work hand in hand. So of course, Vanuatu is going to do their own diplomatic outreach, and this is something that happens often behind closed doors or bilaterally. But we are, I think, really trying to work hand in hand and not have us versus the governments or versus the older people or so, but really do this hand in hand. So we're actually also gathering young people tonight to further increase our international outreach, utilizing the fact that there are so many really incredible young people from all around the world here in Glasgow at the moment. Hoping to get to working alongside the Vanuatu government to get these young people on board tonight.
Wonderful. Well, I think we let you go. So you go to your next meeting, but there are a few questions already for you that we will share with you afterwards. And I think it'll be really great if we can connect very soon, Jule. Thank you and much success. Now, the next topic will be addressed by Stephen Hockman. Stephen, a very warm welcome. I'm really happy it worked out with the connection. Stephen is the head of chambers at 6 Pump Court Chambers in London and is highly recommended by the leading UK legal directories in the areas of environmental law and health and safety law. After the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Conference, he established the International Court for the Environment, or ICE Coalition. Stephen is the chairman of this ICE Coalition, which advocates for an international rule of law that protects the global environment for present and future generations. So, Stephen, why do you and your colleagues propose a new international institution focused on the environment? How would it operate? And can you share where do efforts to create such an ICE stand right now? The floor is yours, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Diana. And perhaps you could just tell me, in view of the technical difficulties that I've been having until about 30 seconds ago, whether you can see and hear me. Right. I will continue. And thank you very much to those who've assisted me and helped me to join. I don't quite know what the problem was. So it's a privilege as well as a pleasure to be joining this distinguished group of speakers and to have the opportunity of explaining our idea for an international court for the environment, or ICE as we like to call it, ICE. So the first thing I want to say is this, and I think that this doesn't need developing at length in view of what's already been said. Any discussion about global governance clearly needs to include a discussion about international judicial institutions. Any discussion about governance, whether at an international or at a domestic level, needs a number of different kinds of institution. At a domestic level, you would have an executive, a legislature, and a judiciary. And certainly at an international level, we need judicial institutions. The kind of judicial institution that we are proposing would be an international court focused on environmental claims and environmental disputes. It wouldn't necessarily have to have a physical location, because in this day and age, such an institution could perhaps operate entirely virtually. Maybe it would be useful to have a physical location, and maybe that location ought to be in the developing world rather than in the developed world, but it could, I think, operate virtually. The judicial members of this institution would include perhaps distinguished environmental lawyers, distinguished retired judges who had specialized in environmental law, and also scientific experts acting as assessors who would be able to help in the elucidation of expert environmental and scientific evidence. So this would be a court which would be absolutely up to date, which would be a court of the 21st century, and would hear claims in respect of environmental issues brought either between states or perhaps by individuals or NGOs against states, or even maybe against corporations. And that is the basic concept. And if you ask, well, why would this court add value to the system that already exists, which of course includes the International Court of Justice, which I think the previous speaker was talking about, although unfortunately I wasn't able to hear very much of her speech. So I think I've probably already said enough to show that this court would be both wider and more flexible in its approach than the International Court of Justice could possibly be. And let me say a few more words about how I think it would contribute in particular to the solution to the issues that are under discussion in Glasgow at the moment, which everybody knows about. Let me take as an example the need for there to be compensation for loss and damage caused as a result of greenhouse gas emissions and as a result of the climate crisis. This, I gather, is not something which is necessarily going to be the result of any agreement in Glasgow. It's still a long way off that there should be a treaty under which claims for loss and damage can be dealt with. Whereas what you would get in a judicial institution of this kind is the opportunity to bring a claim. So groups of people, NGOs, smaller states, small island states, would have the opportunity to bring a claim before this court or tribunal. At the moment, there would not be a way of forcing any defendant to that claim to appear before the court, but it would have every opportunity to appear and to put its side of the story. And then you would get a judicial ruling, and most importantly of all, with reasons. So what you would have is a judicial ruling as to the circumstances in which loss and damage could be claimed. And that, I think, would be an extremely important development. The principles on which loss and damage could be claimed would be set out. Because of the flexibility of the procedure, if it were necessary to have expert evidence to establish the cause of any claim for loss or damage, then that is something which this court could easily accommodate. We've all had experience in the last 18 months of hearings conducted virtually with experts giving evidence, possibly over several days or even weeks. And the complexity of such a hearing, the complexity of such a case could be much more readily accommodated in the kind of judicial institution that I'm describing than in any judicial institution that exists at the moment, at any rate at an international level. So I hope that that gives some picture of the sort of idea that we're promoting. We have been arguing for it, as you kindly said, Diana, for upwards of a decade. And if you ask where we are now, I would summarize it in this way, and I'll conclude with this. When we started, nobody really thought that the idea was even worth considering. It was thought to be an idea which most people regarded as pointless or even perhaps counterproductive. The experience that I have had, and we'll see what people say in the course of this discussion, the experience that I have had now is that as one explains the idea, in general, people say, yes, that's a great idea. Maybe its time hasn't quite yet come, but at least people are now much more positive to the idea. And to my mind, when you look at the concept in the context of what is happening in Glasgow and what is not happening in Glasgow, to my mind, it's an idea which not only has merit, but an idea whose time has indeed come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And actually, this is a question that has come in that if we look at the status of the negotiations during COP26, where do you still see ambiguity? Is there a clear example where there would be a role for such a court to pass a judgment?
I think I've already answered that question, anticipating that it would be asked. One example that I've given is in relation to claims for loss and damage. And as I understand it, it's going to be very difficult indeed to persuade the parties to the COP to agree on a regime for the recovery of damages for any harm caused by climate change. But perhaps even more fundamentally, whatever regime is agreed in treaty form at a general level, it will still be necessary for that regime to take effect on the ground, to know whether particular states or those within particular states are in breach of the treaty regime which has been agreed. And that's where judicial institutions of one sort or another will be absolutely crucial. And so both liability and damages could be dealt with in an institution of the kind that I've described. Diana, I don't know whether you want me to go on and answer any of the other questions in the chat at the moment, or whether you'd rather leave those till a bit later on.
No, well, yes, I'm just having them also on this screen. So Richard is asking, why can't the ICE be run through a wing of the ICJ rather than spend ages setting up a new court? The issue seems so severe that we may need to spend energy more on sorting the problems we have rather than apportioning blame.
Well, I mean, there are two separate questions here. Firstly, as to sorting the problems we have rather than apportioning blame, surely sorting the problems we have does involve identifying those who are responsible for anthropomorphic climate change, in other words, for climate change which is brought about by human activity, and regulating that activity. And for the reasons that I was just explaining, you need judicial institutions to achieve that, or you need a judicial institution to achieve that, rather than simply a treaty. A treaty by itself, if it has no impact on the ground, will achieve nothing. As to whether this could be done through the International Court of Justice, the short answer to that is yes, it could. And if the work that we are doing has the effect that the kind of judicial disputes which we see as inevitable and as necessary if the aspirations of the COP are to be fulfilled, if in the end all of those things can be undertaken, can be dealt with under the aegis of the International Court of Justice, no one will be more pleased than me. And of course, that would make a new institution completely unnecessary. But until such time as we see that happening, I suggest that setting up the sort of flexible, maybe virtual institution of the kind I've referred to, and getting people to decide points of principle and to give reasoned opinions can only be beneficial to the future work that needs to take place.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think your proposal of a court for the 21st century that's also virtual, that will be a nice response to Serge, whose comment was, oh no, we don't need to solve climate crisis by court proceedings, too long. So Serge, what do you think about such a virtual court? Now, let's move on to our next speaker. And Steve, we're still collecting questions for later when you're all back together. Another idea for new international legal institution is the International Anti-Corruption Court, or IACC, which was first proposed by Senior US District Court Judge Mark Wolf. Judge Wolf joins us today in his capacity as chair of Integrity Initiatives International, or III. III was founded to strengthen the enforcement of criminal laws against kleptocrats and is a leading advocate for the creation of an IACC. In June, III released a declaration in support of an IACC that was signed by over 125 world leaders from more than 45 countries. And both the Canadian Liberal and Conservative Party platforms for the federal elections there in September championed the IACC. So, Judge Wolf, why should people who are concerned with the climate crisis be interested in the creation of an IACC? And how would such a court operate? Do we have a poll here? I think Ian just put up a poll. So perhaps everybody would like to respond to this poll, which is at the heart of this question. What has anti-corruption got to do with climate crisis?
Diana, thank you. If we succeeded in putting up the poll question, it asked you how many of the top 10 recipient countries of public climate finance score below 50 out of 100 on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. And you could choose 3, 6, 8, or 10. If you've chosen 10, sadly, you're right. All of the top 10 recipients of public climate aid are among the most corrupt countries in the world, and led by some of the most corrupt leaders in the world, kleptocrats. Those 10 countries are intended to get about 42% of all public climate assistance. For example, Bangladesh, which ranks 146 out of 180 countries on the Corruption Perception Index, it's way down toward the bottom, will be the second largest recipient of public climate assistance. And Uganda, which ranks 142nd, will be the fifth largest recipient. It's totally predictable that massive amounts of both public and private climate funding are going to be lost to grand corruption, the abuse of public office for private gain by a nation's leaders and their collaborators. Nations' leaders considered now to be kleptocrats. This will occur because there's no credible threat that they will be prosecuted and punished for misappropriating and misusing these funds. And that is why the proposed International Anti-Corruption Court is vitally important to the effort to combat and mitigate climate change. Grand corruption thrives in many countries and has devastating consequences. Some of them are obvious, some of them are less evident. The international refugee crises in the Americas, in Europe, are largely caused by migrants fleeing failed corrupt states, which not coincidentally are among the states most severely impacted by climate change. In 2014, the then United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, said, "Corruption kills. The amount lost to corruption every year could feed the world's hungry 80 times over." And we have a more recent, vivid example of how corruption kills. In April of 2020, my colleague in III, Justice Richard Goldstone of South Africa, and I published an article predicting that the COVID-19 pandemic would be a bonanza for kleptocrats, as trillions of dollars were being quickly distributed without the usual and usually ineffective safeguards. Sadly, that's proven to be prophetic, as high-level officials from Brazil to Bolivia to Bosnia-Herzegovina have been arrested or prosecuted for corruption relating to COVID funds. And it's equally predictable that much of the funding sent to developing countries to combat or mitigate climate change will be misappropriated or misused by kleptocrats and their collaborators. Corruption's already a major contributor to climate change. For example, it's estimated that the illicit trade in forestry is $13 billion annually. The Global Climate Fund barely has an auditing function. It has no enforcement mechanism. The UN Independent Integrity Unit has the authority to investigate corruption, but it can't prosecute it. It has to rely on national courts to do that. And that will be futile because kleptocrats control the administration of justice in the countries that they rule. And also, very importantly, not just thinking about the $100 billion a year of public funds that's to be distributed, much greater amounts of private investment are needed to combat, mitigate climate change. But private investors will not invest in the countries that need it most because they will not take the risk that large amounts of their investments will be lost to grand corruption. That's why an international anti-corruption court is needed. This grand corruption doesn't thrive because of a lack of laws. 187 countries are parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption. They all have laws making bribery and extortion and misappropriation of national resources illegal. But kleptocrats have impunity in their own countries because they control the police, the prosecutors, and the courts. A national anti-corruption court would be a forum to enforce existing national laws or a uniform international counterpart of them against kleptocrats and their collaborators. It would be a court of last resort. Like the International Criminal Court, it would operate on the principle of complementarity. So the only officials subject to prosecution in the court would be officials from countries that are unwilling or unable to prosecute themselves. Prosecution in the International Anti-Corruption Court would, if meritorious, if guilt were proven, result in the imprisonment of corrupt leaders and create the opportunity for the democratic process to elect successors who are dedicated to serving their citizens rather than enriching themselves. And the International Anti-Corruption Court would also have very significant potential to recover, repatriate, or repurpose stolen assets, including repurpose to address climate change. And that would be particularly true if it had civil jurisdiction for whistleblower cases comparable to the US False Claims Act. The main argument against the International Anti-Corruption Court has been not that it's illogical, but it's been impossible. Countries led by kleptocrats won't join. But as our colleagues in the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism recently provided even more compelling proof of, kleptocrats don't keep their money in their own countries. They move those illicit assets through the international financial system. And the International Anti-Corruption Court could be created and be effective with as few as 20 to 25 representative countries, as long as they include some, like Switzerland and Singapore, that are major financial centers or attractive destinations for illicit funds, such as Canada. As Diana said, in June, more than 120 world leaders, former heads of state and Nobel laureates among them, signed a declaration calling for the creation of the International Anti-Corruption Court. Since then, both the Liberal and Conservative parties in Canada have called for the creation of the court in their platforms for the recent federal election. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands has expressed to us significant interest in this. We've been asked to do a briefing in the near future for the Foreign Ministry of Spain. All of this very encouraging with regard to putting together the international coalition of countries and NGOs that will lead to the creation of this court. But most encouraging to me is the really energetic and enthusiastic support of courageous young people from around the world. III, Integrity Initiatives International, recently activated its Youth Leaders Network, which includes young anti-corruption activists from Venezuela, Russia, Lebanon, Uzbekistan, Mexico, Norway, Uganda, Latvia, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Tajikistan, Turkey, Peru, India, Germany, and the United States. And all of this gives me great hope that the rapid recent progress of the effort to create the International Anti-Corruption Court will accelerate, hopefully in partnership with many of you. I would be happy to hear from you at mark.wolf@integrityinitiatives.org, or you can write to us on our website, integrityinitiatives.org. But in any event, thank you very much for the opportunity to both learn from this impressive program and contribute to it.
Thank you so much, Judge Wolf. Well, you know that we share your enthusiasm for this proposal. I have one question here from Maja, and it says, Like the International Criminal Court, the proposed IACC would be a court of last resort. Are there important ways in which the IACC would be different from the ICC?
That's an excellent question. The short answer is yes. There are lessons to be learned from the ICC. The International Anti-Corruption Court would be staffed by experienced, expert investigators, prosecutors, and judges who have proven experience in presiding in complex financial and corruption cases. It's possible to be a judge of the International Criminal Court without any prior judicial experience. That's not what we anticipate. There's also certain advantages because usually the evidence, almost always the evidence of war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide are in the country controlled by the perpetrator. But since kleptocrats invariably launder their illicit gains through the international financial system into other countries, there'll be evidence in those other countries, and it will be possible, for example, to prosecute a kleptocrat for money laundering in Switzerland if Switzerland joins the court but doesn't want to prosecute that kleptocrat itself. It can defer to the International Anti-Corruption Court. And therefore, as I said, necessarily talking quickly, this is a court that could be created initially and be effective with as few as 20 to 25 countries. And it is far more possible than people have until very recently been giving it credit that this court is indeed going to be created. And hopefully, and it will, if it's created, it will be important to the international effort to mitigate climate change and to protect the enormous funds that hopefully will be devoted to doing that.
Thank you, Judge Wolf. Now, beyond international institutions, it's also worth considering new legal paradigms to address the climate crisis. Oh, Maud. I'm just about to get to you, and I know you're in a pub in the Highlands. Let me just do this introduction. Maud is a human rights and international criminal lawyer. She advocates for creative legal thinking to mitigate climate change and protect the environment. Maud is a former legal advisor to various UN tribunals, recently founded her own advisory practice, and acts as legal advisor to the Austrian NGO All Rise. All Rise recently filed a complaint in the Hague Criminal Court against Brazil's President Bolsonaro, who is being accused of crimes against humanity due to his involvement in the deforestation of the Amazon. Now, Maud, I'm going to ask you two questions. Please, can you first introduce the concept of ecocide for those of us who may be unfamiliar with it? And then, is it actually needed to address the climate crisis? Maud, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you everyone for this fascinating conversation, discussion on all these creative ideas to address the environmental and climate crisis. So to answer the question as to how to define ecocide, ecocide is an idea. It refers to the destruction of the natural environments by deliberate and negligent human action. The first time it was coined, it was actually used was in 1970 at a war crime conference by a scientist, and then reused in 1972 by Olof Palme in the Stockholm conference that most of you already know. And since then it's been discussed, but there's no universal definition that's been agreed upon on an international level as to what ecocide actually is. You have about 10 countries in the world which have incriminated ecocide in their domestic legislations, most of them former Soviet Union countries. And the idea and the concept of ecocide has actually blossomed and gone back to the forefront of the legal public debate in 2010 with late Polly Higgins, who submitted a proposal to the General Assembly of the UN in 2010, and then it was followed by two French individuals, one professor called Laurent Néret, and then an activist called Valérie Cabanès. And they all came with different definitions, different proposals, different approaches. But the very interesting part is that very recently, in June this year, you had this NGO called Stop Ecocide, which mandated and commissioned a collective of international lawyers, some of them QCs, but Philip Sands, he's a QC who chairs the panel, but also like other lawyers from all over the world, so very diverse, representative of the global south, the global north, who got together and agreed on a proposal of a definition, which I will read to you now, if you can bear with me. So their proposal is that for the purpose of this statute, ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So that's a lot of legal jargon, but that's the most concrete step that was taken recently for ecocide to become a fifth international crime to sit alongside the existing crimes being already defined by their own statutes under the International Criminal Court. The four other crimes, as you probably already know, are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Now, the challenge with this proposed definition is that, as I explained a little bit before, it comes from an NGO, it comes from civil society, and for this proposal to become law, you have to get the agreement of the state parties to their own statutes. And given the procedural steps required for such proposal to go forward, it's unlikely, as it is right now, for this particular proposal to be turned into law and turned into an incrimination. So all of this should answer the first question, which is, what is all ecocide about? And then the second question that you raised was, is it needed to address the climate crisis? Now, to address this second question, I think it's important to perhaps take a step back and identify, or go back to the identified causes or key causes for the climate crisis. So I think the major, and I think the UNFCCC has been quite open about that the two major causes for the climate crisis are, one, the use, treatment, extraction of fossil fuels, and two, deforestation. So where does that leave us? At this point in time, the International Criminal Court and their own statute, like I said before, incriminate genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. But there's almost nothing that deals with environmental crimes. There's just one provision under the war crime category, which sets incredibly challenging and difficult conditions for it to be applied. Now, does that mean that ecocide is needed? Well, I think before actually asking that question, a very important important step is to try and test the law as it is and see how and to which extent the impact on deforestation or the impact of fossil fuel extraction, use, treatment, etc., has locally on local communities and population, regionally and globally. And that's the approach that was taken by the All Rise initiative, which submitted earlier this month 2 reports, one legal and another one focusing on climate aspects. In the legal report, we tried to propose a creative interpretation of the applicable law on crimes against humanity and demonstrate how deforestation has an impact locally on communities depending on the forest, has an impact regionally on the whole ecosystems, which are affected by mass deforestation. So I should have said All Rise, the initiative All Rise deals with the situation in Brazil. I forgot to mention that, which is kind of a key aspect of it. So the All Rise submission is an Article 15 communication. So it's information which have been submitted to the International Criminal Court and the Prosecution's Office to describe how deforestation, mass deforestation in the Amazon has impact on local population, has a regional impact, and also global impact on the climate crisis. And through our analysis of mass deforestation and its various and the different levels of its impacts, we're trying to show that the law as it is can be used and can be interpreted creatively to address the climate crisis, to address the environmental destruction and the consequences on local population. Now, we are aware that the likelihood for this to be adopted by the prosecution's office or the judges is small, but even if it isn't, the advantage that is got is to show the legal vacuum that exists and perhaps support the Ecocide campaign or the campaign to create Ecocide as a 5th crime, supports also the campaign that Stephen Hockman was describing earlier, that is creating an international environmental court, or support what Judge Wolf was saying as well about the anti-corruption court. All of this, when you have concrete situations and you show how environmental destruction on a massive level impacts on people, and how the law is no longer adapted to these challenges, then I think it's through these case studies and through the analysis of these impacts that we can push towards new ideas that all of you beautifully introduced tonight.
Thank you, Maud. Maud, a question that has come in here is, can President Bolsonaro be held individually criminally responsible for climate change? And if yes, how? In response to the All Rise campaign.
That's the difficulty with the law as it is. So criminal law requires a demonstration of several elements, one of which is intent, and also the demonstration of a causal link between the alleged offense and the intent. And when it comes to President Bolsonaro, the difficulty is that you can't, in my view at least, attribute the responsibility, criminal responsibility for climate change to one person. The responsibility is diluted. So one of the idea behind this initiative, the All Rise initiative, is to push, again, like I said before, push in the direction of showing what can be attributed to mass deforestation, what can be attributed to Bolsonaro as its policy encourage mass deforestation, and show that the law as it is not really adapted to attribute any criminal responsibility to him. And then maybe inspire people to develop new legal instruments, new legal tools to better apply to these kind of situations. So in a nutshell, I don't think the responsibility for climate change should be attributed to Bolsonaro.
Thank you, Maud. That's clear. We have another question, but I'll leave that for the end of the session when everybody is back together, because I would like to move on to our last speaker, Paulo. Boa tarde. Are you there in Porto? Yes.
Yeah. Boa tarde.
Hello,
Boa tarde.
Paulo. So
thank you so much for the invitation, Diana.
Thank you so much for joining us, Paulo. To introduce you, Paulo is a researcher at the Center for Legal and Economic Research at the University of Porto and the founder and president of Common Home of Humanity. So, Paulo, the current framework of the Paris Agreement recognizes climate as a common concern. Paulo, why is this a problem for climate action, and why do you propose a new legal status for the global ecological commons? Paulo.
Yes, thank you so much for your question. This is usually something that is not discussed. Nobody talks about the legal status of climate as a common concern. We must think that this was decided on the 80s, and at this time, they think that this was a wonderful solution, okay? Because, the first proposal, as we will see, it was to recognize climate as a common heritage. But the question is, climate is inside and outside all the countries, all the sovereignties, and this is not match with the pillars of international law. So they try to find another solution, and they say this concept of common concern must be developed in the future in terms of rights and duties. 30 years later, we still do not know what the concern is in terms of rights and duties. So I have a little presentation that I want to share with you, because probably this is something. It's already you are already seeing my presentation or not? Yes.
I don't think everyone has seen it, and also we have an online audience. We have people joining us from outside of this panel, so it's great to show it, Paulo.
Am I sharing my screen or not?
You are sharing it right now, and if you go on full screen for your presentation.
Okay. Now it's you are seeing the presentation, right? Right?
See, yes.
Yes. Okay. So as I told, this is something that is already talked by Professor Simon Borg. That's saying that climate is an intangible natural resource that spans across, obviously, beyond the national territories of states, and this is very subversive to international law. The question is why it is intangible. The question is, a stable climate is the circulation pattern that corresponds to a stable global climate. And from a legal standpoint, it can only be classified as an intangible good. A stable climate is what we are seeing here. These patterns of circulations that corresponds to predictable and stable climate. This arises mainly from the difference of temperatures between the equator and poles, creating thermodynamics that result in a stable climate. From the question is, with the human activities that are changing the biochemical composition of the atmosphere, we are changing that relation, that thermodynamics, and provoking the destabilization of climate, as we are seeing in that image. So the question is, climate change or climate is a global common and the tragedy of commons in a global scale. This is accepted in several studies and several studies saying that climate change is a tragedy of commons. The question is, that we, from a legal standpoint, we do not accept climate as a common good, and we do not manage climate as a common good. As I have told you, the first proposal is in 1988 from Malta was to recognize climate as a common heritage of mankind. If this proposal was accepted, we would have an intangible global common that cross borders that must be managed by an international institution managing something that exists inside and outside all the borders. But this was not accepted. And from the proposal from conservation of climate as a part of common heritage, the option was to recognize climate as a common concern of humankind. So we still have a one view without a global common across borders, and we do not have an object of governance, of global governance, as if we have accepted the first proposal. All the previous speakers before me talk about courts, about ecocide, about the tools that are needed, and I agree with all of them, that are needed to manage and to have sanctions on the governance of the global common. But the first step to have all this structure of governance and courts and so on is to define the common good. Okay? So, as I have told you, when in the 80s, they defended the concept of common concern of mankind. The Mustafa Toma, that was the first executive director of UNEP, say very clear. It is also important to make sure that how this concept can be interpreted in terms of rights and obligations of states in the process of its implementation. 30 years after this sentence, we haven't made any steps in this process of implementation. As we have also, in Paris Agreement, climate change is a common concern of humankind. And this is the framework of Paris Agreement also. And climate is not a feeling of humans. Climate is not a worry that do not correspond to a worry, humans that are worried. Climate is something that exists in nature, although intangible, it's nature, and we can scientifically define what is a stable climate. So it's not only a common good from a legal point of view, because we cannot divide, even if it is in an abstract way, the climate. We can divide the airspace, and to avoid that a plane entering my airspace, we cannot divide the chemical composition of the atmosphere. We cannot divide the chemical composition of the oceans. So, from a legal standpoint, it's really a common good. But also because it is exhaustible. From an economic point of view, it is also a common good because it's not a free good. So we have two views of the world. We have this view of the territorial approach, that we still keep this territorial approach in our law, but at the same time, we need to represent from a legal standpoint the global common that do not respect boundaries and need to be addressed as a single whole, also from a legal point of view. We have invented the abstractions that divide countries, that divide the oceans. Now we need to invent a legal representation of the unity of the climate, the unity of the Earth system, also from a legal standpoint. So, and these make all the difference as I will explain. So what we have, because we have opted by the concern approach, what we say, because we are worried, each country says, I will make less emissions. I will try to make less emissions. So in the end of the day, we have always a negative sum game. Or we have in the CO2 markets, if someone makes less emissions, it will sell the credits to another one that will make the emissions. So in this case, we have a zero-sum game. And we also have a zero-sum game where someone with a forest make one capture of the CO2 that was emitted by someone. It's a zero-sum game. The question is to cleaning the atmosphere, that is what we need now, is cleaning something that belongs to no one. It's like cleaning in a legal void, because the common good does not exist for international law. So in our system, we need to have emissions to give value to the capture of that emissions. So the question in this status of the framework of climate is it is impossible to clean the atmosphere, because the value it's on the emission and not on the absorption of that emission. So linking biodiversity, environmental services, and law, we have the biodiversity, the ecosystem process and functioning that give rise to environmental services, that give rise to benefits, that if we have a concerned approach, these benefits spread across the planet and the value disappears into a legal void. If we have a common heritage, the benefits spread across the planet that can be captured in the common heritage. So we need a legal basis to be possible to build one economy that is able to restore a stable climate. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. This is the problem that is behind our inability to tackle climate change. Without making this evolution in international law that is necessary to recognize the common good that across borders, and to accept also from a legal standpoint that we have something that unites us all and exists inside and outside all borders, and we depend on it. We need to have this legal basis to build a system of congruence between the rules of appropriation and provision, to build a system of governance, to build a system of sanctions and courts, and a process of decisions. You need to build a system of human governance. Thank you so much for the time you gave me.
Paolo, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think someone is typing a question, but allow me to thank all our speakers for sharing with us your original and truly inventive thinking in this session. I would like to hand over to Maja now. Maja, as the convener of the Climate Governance Commission, what's your reaction to what you heard, and also in light of some of the comments, primarily from Richard Parler? Thank you so much for being an active participant. Maja, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, indeed, a big thanks to everybody and their presentations. And I guess it reminds me of why I got into this sort of macro global governance topic as a practicing international lawyer based in The Hague, negotiating and servicing binding multilateral treaties. I realized really the potential of international law and international institutions, and also, you know, how many good ideas there are out there. And now we're confronting really a crossroads, indeed, in human history. You know, some have said, including very knowledgeable scientists, you know, this might be the most important decade in human history, because the time is so short for us to take the actions necessary to keep ourselves on this path to a safe climate future. So the global governance and the international law, international institution mechanisms are so vital, because climate change and related ecological risks are quintessential quintessential global challenges. So it's, from my perspective, it's really time that we accelerate our thinking about the various levers for global governance. So part of this process is indeed bringing together leading ideas, you've heard some of them today, really, heads of various campaigns who are thinking very practically what is needed to properly manage the climate challenge at the global level from various dimensions and aspects. And I very much agree, for example, on the issue of corruption. We absolutely need this kind of mechanism to improve our governance if we have any hope of trying to manage our planetary ecological risks. But as some of the questions have raised in the chat, it's also a matter of knowing how to navigate our existing international institutions and courts, what they can do, what they can't do, their histories, the different institutional cultures. Can we use, existing institutions? Do we need new ones? So you need the expert sort of interface also with, global public and wider professional dialogues. But now is indeed the time to try to have these dialogues and accelerate these various movements around these very worthwhile projects. So, and as Jule said, for example, this youth movement of law students around the world to get an advisory opinion at this existing International Court of Justice, where members of the global public don't know so much even about this court, or they think there's one world court in The Hague, whereas it's a multiplicity of various institutions. Yet and often they're being underutilized. The International Court of Justice, its statute is appended to the UN Charter, so it has also remained largely frozen in time for the last 75 years plus. So, and just a note on the International Court of Justice, less than 40% of UN members have accepted its compulsory jurisdiction, whereas there are far more states that have accepted the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute, simply because there's been more public attention, more campaigning, more pressure. So you can see how the wider global public community and professional community can be very instrumental in ensuring that international justice moves forward. And is improved, and there's so much we need to improve international justice across a wide range of areas. So those are sort of my general comments. I think everybody on this panel making presentations is a sort of norm entrepreneur. As Stephen was saying, in the past years, it has been, sort of a very peripheral, sort of futuristic idea. Oh, International Court of the Environment, that's ridiculous. But now seeing the gravity of our global environmental issues, it becomes more of a very palatable idea that we must put on the table and explore, again, and also with the climate finance, for example, and that top 10 list of countries receiving finance, et cetera, and the legal paradigm that Paulo is suggesting, also really fascinating, and some leading global planetary scientists are also really pushing for this idea and understand kind of very, very clearly how much we need to have this shared global conception of the climate and planetary boundaries in order to manage them properly. A new legal conception. So just to applaud everybody as norm entrepreneurs and taking part in these very, very, very important dialogues at this time. So perhaps, Diana, there are some questions for different panelists or general questions from the audience.
Yes, indeed, we have some more comments and questions, and I'll ask them. But I would also like to invite Paulo, Stephen, Judge Wolf, and Maud, to comment on what they heard from their peers in this session. So, Judge Wolf. Oh, sorry.
Yes, there's one question that was put to Maud that I'd like to respond to, because it goes, in some respects, to the essential value of the International Anti-Corruption Court. She was asked if President Bolsonaro could be prosecuted for damaging the Amazon. And she correctly said that would be extremely difficult to prosecute him as an individual. However, if as may be very likely, he's involved in corruption relating to damage to the Amazon, he could be prosecuted. And if he couldn't be in Brazil, he could be prosecuted in the International Anti-Corruption Court. Let me amplify this because the International Anti-Corruption Court has been increasingly recognized as a way of punishing and imprisoning the worst violators of human rights. It's very hard to prove genocide or crimes against humanity, war crimes. It's not easy, but it's easier to prove money laundering. I'm a former prosecutor of corrupt public officials. That's how I became a federal judge in the United States. The Brazilian construction company, Odebrecht, has admitted in U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act cases, primarily paying $800 million in bribes to officials in 12 Latin American countries. And implicated in that scandal were several huge dams on the Amazon River that would displace thousands of people and produce enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. This was before Bolsonaro was president of Brazil. His Minister of Justice, his first Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro, evidently resigned his office in meaningful measure because his efforts to investigate Bolsonaro's son were being frustrated by the president. So Brazil is slated to be fifth highest country receiving public assistance to combat climate change. If, as I predicted, a lot of this money is going to be stolen by kleptocrats, and if Bolsonaro is one of them and wants to take bribes, for example, in connection with contracts relating to the Amazon, and companies that pay bribes invariably do shoddy work if they do it at all, then he could be held personally, criminally accountable if he were prosecuted. And if he couldn't be prosecuted in Brazil because he controls the administration of justice, he could be prosecuted in the International Anti-Corruption Court, especially if he laundered some of that money through a member country. So all of these things are everything we've been hearing, I think, it's organic, it's synergistic. It's striking to me that Stephen, whom I've not met or I'm embarrassed to say heard of, is thinking very similarly to Triple I on many issues. We've talked about how there could be, if not a completely virtual court, a court with a relatively small physical footprint. It should be a court that tries cases as close to the victims as possible, as my colleague Justice Richard Goldstone, who was the special prosecutor for the Rwanda court, tried the cases in Sierra Leone, The Hague, with all due respect to Diana. But there are a lot of similarities, and I think I've certainly been educated to understand them better. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Wolf. Maud, would you like to respond?
Yeah, just to add to what Judge Wolf said, I fully support, second, and agree with everything that you just explained. A lot of mass deforestation and environmental crimes, generally speaking, are caused or are intertwined and associated with corruption, money laundering, etc., etc. And in addition to what you specified regarding the situation in Brazil, in the All Rise 2 reports, we particularly dug in an incident of corruption. It's a big case, actually, which is currently prosecuted by the Brazilian judicial authorities, involving Ricardo Salles, the previous former Minister of Environment, and which probably extends much further throughout the administration. I won't get into the details, but corruption, money laundering are indeed very huge drivers behind environmental crimes. And regarding the ideas of setting up new courts, my only concern, and you've already addressed it, Stephen and Judge Wolf, in your presentations, is that it's time consuming, which is why with the Arise initiative, the idea was really to try and use what we've got to show what we don't have, and fuel these debates and see what's the best idea, what's the best initiative, what's the most viable tool. And if we can't use it as it is, then see and explore further the idea of an international environmental court, the idea of an international anti-corruption court. But for the International Criminal Court, which is dysfunctional for many reasons, these anti-corruption, the crimes of anti-corruption was already discussed, as Judge Wolf, you probably know, and was considered to be included in the list of crimes under the jurisdiction of the court. Environmental crimes are also considered, and both anti-corruption, environmental crimes, anti-terrorism, and drug trafficking, they weren't, they didn't make it in the end in the Rome Statute. So an alternative idea, which perhaps I'm not even convinced of it myself, but creating separate chambers within the same courts and funding them accordingly, rather than setting up a new court for anti-corruption, a new court for environmental issues, could also be perhaps explored as ideas that satisfy both the anti-corruption court idea or the environmental court idea. I don't know what you think about that. I'd be really curious to hear you.
We have explored that, and Justice Goldstone is probably the world's leading expert on this. First, it would be extremely difficult to reopen and revise the Rome statutes. It requires a very high percentage of the member states to agree to an amendment, and the states ruled by kleptocrats foreseeably wouldn't join. And indeed, if you reopen the Rome statute, you might lose the court completely in the current environment. Second, so that's a pragmatic reason. In addition, if corruption was put within the mandate of the International Criminal Court, it would inevitably receive low priority. The court has limited human and financial resources. There are devastating consequences to grand corruption, but a court that's been constituted to deal with the very worst crimes, genocide, is not likely to give them adequate time and attention. And in addition, the court, there are lessons to be learned from the court. We don't foresee having a court with multiple chambers. We foresee having a court with experienced judges. And I was going so quickly, I don't think I said this explicitly. We anticipate creating this court outside the United Nations system, the way the landmine ban treaty, led by our friend and colleague Lloyd Axworthy, former foreign minister of Canada, now the president of the World Refugee and Migration Council, achieved the landmine treaty. Because some of the difficulties with the ICC come from the fact that the Security Council can protect countries and leaders who should be prosecuted, but for political reasons don't permit it. So it is something. And in fact, when I wrote my first paper on this, 2014, there was a calculated ambiguity. It discussed the court, International Anti-Corruption Court, either being part of or separate from the International Criminal Court. But since then, I and many others starting with Prince Zayed Raad Al Hussein, who was then the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, explained to me why it should be separate. And I think there are good reasons for it to be separate. And indeed, it'll be easier to create if it's not through an effort to make it part of the ICC.
Stephen, please.
Thank you very much. The overriding impression I have from this interesting discussion is that there is scope for all these ideas to be progressed. They're not in conflict with one another, they're complementary, and we probably need to make progress on every front that we've heard about. But let me just add one further thought, because I think that there's a distinction to be drawn between two types of approach. Both are valid, but I think it's worth recognizing the distinction. The starting point for this is that inevitably in the end, what we're trying to do is to influence the behavior of human beings. Climate change, whether it's caused by carbon emissions on the one hand or by deforestation on the other, is, as we now recognize, largely the result of human activity. At any rate, the solution to it is definitely going to lie in changing human behavior. And the great virtue of the approaches outlined by Maud and by Mark is that their proposals would impact directly on individuals and on the behavior of individuals by penalizing individuals who engage in, if you like, extreme forms of misbehavior which have an adverse impact on climate change and on the environment in general. But there must also be scope, must there not, for approaches which don't just address culpable individuals who engage in extreme forms of behavior, such as their ideas would be directed to, but for approaches which try to regulate the behavior of ordinary people doing what at the moment are regarded as ordinarily accepted things. And this is where you need improvements in global governance, which will bear down upon the nation states which allow this sort of activity to continue. So all the things which people in Glasgow have been telling us hour after hour and day after day need to change, these are not things which are currently criminal. If they were, then people would be prosecuted, and they would be prosecuted within the countries concerned. These are things which at the moment are perfectly legitimate, but they're also very harmful indeed. So what we need to do is to influence the behavior of nation states, influence the behavior of political systems all around the world, so as to enable those systems in future to regulate and, if necessary, to criminalize behavior which at the moment is perfectly lawful. And I think that the role, therefore, of international law, of international treaties, and, dare I say it, of international judicial institutions is precisely that, to influence nation states to change their internal arrangements so as to regulate better the things which at the moment are largely unregulated. And if I can just put in a small plug for the ICE idea, that is very much the concept that we're working towards. In other words, an institution which can hold individual nation states to account if a claim is brought against them, and which can declare, at least initially, to make a declaratory judgment that declares a nation state to be in breach of some principle of international law, such as the principle that one state must not act in such a way as to harm another state, to use the principles of international law, including perhaps an expanded principle protecting international common land, international common assets, such as Paolo was recommending, but to use international law to bring pressure to bear upon nation states. At the moment, we don't have an international police force, we don't have an international army, we don't have any of the mechanisms by which the law is enforced within a country, within a nation state. So every decision at an international level, even decisions by the International Court of Justice, are ultimately declaratory. They are declarations as to what international institutions think the law is or should be, and how we expect nation states to behave. And that's the task in which I suspect that this whole discussion is really ultimately designed to engage in and to achieve.
Thank you. Any comments from our fellow panelists? Because I have a question here specifically for Paolo, and also looking at the time, it would be nice if we can engage a little bit more our viewers online. Paolo, the question for you is, what are the next steps that need to happen to establish a common heritage definition of climate for legal use? So what are the next steps needed in order to establish a common heritage definition of climate for legal use? Do you have a short answer to that?
A short answer. In terms of legal definition, we must be, the legal definition must be supported by science. The question, we have now the scientific instruments that define the safe operating space for humankind. And these planet boundaries should be the scientific instruments that can define our global common. You understand? That is not only CO2. The next steps is to build a coalition of states, between states and civil society, to make this recognition in international terms. Okay, I can say also that last Friday in my country it was approved the climate law, and there for the first time climate is recognized, or the government has the task of pursuing it in the United Nations to promote the recognition of climate as a common heritage. It was approved last Friday. It will be published and get enforced in the next month, but the first country has already advanced. Okay, thank you.
Great news. Congratulations, Paolo. I remember we were waiting for this decision when we last spoke, so that's really great news.
It was approved by a large majority in the National Assembly. Only one vote against.
Okay, great news. Hopefully this will be a precedent for many other countries. And a question here from Richard Ponzio to all of you. Please choose who would like to answer it. To substantially improve climate governance coming out of COP26, what needs to be prioritized? How can Stockholm Plus 50 in June 22 and the UN Secretary General's September 2023 Summit of the Future be leveraged to support more innovative and effective climate governance worldwide?
Do you want me to go for that one? Since it's an upcoming large international
If I may
meeting.
To second what Stephen just said, I think each idea is worth exploring, and now it's like a rat race. Like the first one, the one that's going to be deemed the most effective, or that's going to gather the most support, the first then will be the winner in a way. So I don't think anything should be excluded at this stage. Everybody is exploring different ideas. It's like kite in a hurricane at the moment, but perhaps it's for the best. I know it's frustrating and it doesn't go fast enough, etc. But you've got so much energy, so much people, so many brains, working towards these ideas, legal ideas or other ideas, and pushing them towards for creativity. I think none should be discouraged, and it's really a matter of the ones which will gather the most support the fastest.
Except that I don't think you should see this as a competition. I mean, as I said, I think all these ideas are complementary. Influencing the behavior of nation states is all well and good, and that's what I'm most interested in. But at the same time, you certainly do need to prosecute people who are guilty of crimes against humanity or anything that we would now regard as equivalent to that. And that's a perfectly viable approach, and I don't see us necessarily being in a race or a competition. It's a question of, in fact, I think that each of these, any progress that's made on any of these themes is likely to strengthen the others as well, because it will strengthen the view that international solutions are needed.
And I would say I fully agree with Stephen. First, I think all of these approaches are complementary. Just as in the law, we have the criminal law that we rely on for some things, and civil law and regulations. We need the whole spectrum of approaches. There's no panacea or magic bullet. I also very deeply agree that a fundamental theme cutting across all of this is the need to change behavior. And that's the fundamental premise of the criminal law generally. The threat of severe consequences will cause people not to do bad things. But in the context of what we're discussing, I would say it will also cause nations not to do bad things. As a judge, I frequently push back when I'm asked to, in a criminal case, sanction a corporation, but not the individuals who acted for the corporation and committed the criminal acts. I believe that countries like corporations ultimately act because individuals have decided to act. And if, with regard to corruption, it's a crime of calculation, in contrast to genocide or war crimes, which frequently fueled by ethnic animosity or in the heat of battle by definition. Corruption occurs because greedy, powerful people calculate that they won't get caught, they won't be punished, and so why not steal the money or the equivalent? And it's important to change conduct, to try to deter that conduct by showing that that's a miscalculation. So this is what led to the proposal for the International Anti-Corruption Court, the perception that there is this missing crucial link in the international system, and that is there's no place to enforce criminal laws, existing criminal laws, essentially against kleptocrats. But criminal prosecution would never be adequate in itself. I would say it's necessary but not sufficient, and that's why, I too think that all of these ideas are important and complementary.
It's a
I apologize,
nightmare, Diana. You've got everybody agreeing with everybody else.
Well, the session is being recorded, so I will take you all up on it. So just so you're aware. Maja?
I shouldn't have used the rat race term, because I do agree with Stephen and Judge Wolf about the complementarity of all these ideas.
Also, can I just note, we've talked about the need for international judicial institutions that have more authority and that, are dealing with vital issues, governance issues of our time. And I would just note, in international law, generally, we have what I would call a general kind of enforcement gap. The international community has been quite good at setting and generating new international norms, the UNCAC, all the hundreds of international environmental treaties, but we still have this huge hurdle to overcome in terms of real enforcement that would change behavior. And just to note also in terms of whether it's so time consuming to set up courts, we've seen in the international courts, we've seen in the international criminal law area, a proliferation of courts, both dedicated to certain national situations and also hybrid courts. So they can be set up relatively quickly if the international community sees a need. And also in terms of the financing, I'd refer again to that paper written by Augusto. There are enormous amounts of wealth in the world, and it's a matter of really ethics and deployment of good policies to try to make sure we have adequate global public funding to support the various, judicial systems that we need. And Stephen, just one note in terms of, an international enforcement bailiff or enforcement officer. The UN Security Council currently is tasked with enforcing judgments of the International Court of Justice and other tasks. But of course, there's the veto power. The UN Security Council is not a committee, a council that's been used as an impartial sort of enforcer of international justice, be they decisions of the ICJ or otherwise. So that goes back to the charter issue. And I'd refer you to the chapter, everyone to the chapter in a book where we talk about like a more rational, cogent way to have an international executive council to, again, upgrade the whole system. But should I just go quickly to Richard's question, Diana, and then maybe Paolo also has thoughts on pathways forward. So in terms of
let me read the question, Maja, because Maud for some reason has trouble understanding you, but I think everybody else can hear you really well. So this is the question about the tools you want to respond to?
Richard Ponzio's question. Coming out of COP26, what should be prioritized? Stockholm plus 50 in 2022. Then the UN Secretary General's
I can't hear Maja at all for some reason.
September 2023 Summit of the Future.
Maja, sorry,
yes.
I know it's the one I just read. Let me read it again because more than you seem to have a disconnection. She can't hear you. So more than everybody else, this question from Richard Ponzio was to substantially improve climate governance coming out of COP26. What needs to be prioritized first, and how can Stockholm plus 50 and the UN Secretary General's September 23 Summit of the Future be leveraged to support more innovative and effective climate governance worldwide? Maja.
Yeah, so coming out of COP26, the focus really here has been can countries, given our current sort of decentralized ad hoc system of implementation, really work together to implement around key issue areas. So I would just refer to the Climate Governance Commission's interim report and all of the proposals that are sort of bottom up. For example, international policy clearinghouse where states can share best practices on vital climate policies, how we can really ramp up international finance, deal with labor market bottlenecks or transitions to make the transition from brown to green energy, and also add energy to the International Anti-Corruption Court efforts, which is now gaining a lot of buy-in from various states. So there's a number, I'm not listing all of them, but there's a number of really actionable near-term sort of global governance innovations that we can do right away. Then leading up to Stockholm plus 50, and Paolo and I and others have discussed about this. And in the civil society community, the thought is really we need a global paradigm shift in international environmental law, what we've done to date. We have the enforcement gap, but we also need this really profound paradigm shift, such as Paolo has been talking about, to really try to manage the crisis which is before us. So hopefully, Stockholm Plus 50, there could be some talk around this paradigm shift needed and laying the groundwork for new institutions or enhanced institutions at the global level, like a global environment agency, together with an international court for the environment. But I would then say join also, and this hopefully could be discussed in 2023, having an international rule of law package, including the IACC, together with thinking, what do we really need at the institutional level globally to manage our global ecological problems? A global environment agency, perhaps under the trusteeship council, with this notion of a common heritage of humanity, and also linked to an international court for the environment. So that would be my idea. We need to have this conceptual paradigm shift in our legal approach to climate environment. And then we also need to lay the groundwork and try to push the progressive states to really pioneer work on the global institutions, including these global judicial mechanisms.
Maja, thank you. What a wonderful and concise summary. And I guess the tip for everyone, read the report. It is now in the chat box. Thank you, Ian, for posting it. And allow me to quickly summarize what we've heard in this session. Maja Groff shared how international law is no longer an esoteric field, but it has actually matured significantly. It gives us tools that are at our disposal for our collective benefit. And we've had great success in the past that started as civil society-led initiatives. Stephen mentioned also the International Criminal Court and the treaty to ban landmines, for example. Maja, in one of our conversations, you said, let's think big about international law. And given how serious the threat of the climate crisis is and some of the comments and remarks that we heard tonight, I think it's fair to conclude that we all agree that we need to think big. Jule definitely agrees on this last point because she will take the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. She has a very concrete call to action to all of us. Join us on this journey. We only need a simple majority to be able to seek this advisory opinion from the ICJ. Connect us with people you know who can help, endorse us and vote for us. Stephen Hockman highlighted how not only the law has a role to play to achieve climate goals, but that the courts and judges have a part to play as well. Domestic courts already give judgments on climate topics, but the global impact is missing here. The advantage of an ICE would be that it can decide which laws to apply. Judge Wolf shared how important it is for people to understand how kleptocracy and corruption are major impediments to addressing the climate crisis. This fact is not yet recognized enough. Addressing corruption is not a diversion, but indeed it's an essential element of addressing the climate crisis. And Maud gave us insight into how the current international framework is not adapted to the environmental and climate crises. She strongly advises that it's essential to start with what we have and then test and push for a creative interpretation of the applicable law as a first step towards change. And Paolo urges us to distinguish sovereign territories of our planet from the whole Earth system, which must be recognized as a common good. And we are bang on time. Thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing contributions. And I hope that our audience has gained a good insight into how global governance can be enhanced for our common good. Have a great rest of COP26. Connect on LinkedIn, drop us a line. We'd love to continue the dialogue, and have a good evening or rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.